So today I want to tell you about a specific moment that happened to me while I was trying to rebuild my life. I was at an industry event just not too long ago, and the kind that, where people wear name tags and they practice answers like, so what do you do? And people answer in their elevator pitch, right? So I've been building Too Late My Ass for a period of months, and I had a business and I had an audience and I had a news story. And then somebody walked up to me, looked at my name tag and said, "Oh, Faye, I heard that you left corporate a while back, a few years ago. How's that going? Do you miss it?" And I paused, not because I missed it, but because for one actual second, I had to locate who I was before I could answer the question. Not the old me, I had to locate the new me. And I realized in that pause, I had converted. The old identity was the one I had to reach for more than the new one, because the new one was just who I was. It was there. So just standing at the event, just answering questions, no effort required. That was the crossing point. And today we're going to talk about how to get there.
You're listening to Too Late My Ass, the podcast that exists because someone had to say it out loud. I'm Faye Chappell, and this show is for anyone who's been quietly wondering if they missed their window. Spoiler, you didn't. Your brain is still neuroplastic, your identity is still negotiable, and your second act, it's not a consolation prize, it's the whole damn point. Let's get into it.
So welcome back to Too Late My Ass. I'm Faye Chappell. I'm a former global executive, reinvention architect, and the person who built this entire brand on a singular belief that you are not too late for anything. So today's episode, we're going to call it The Convert. And before we go anywhere, I want to be very clear about what I mean by that word, because I'm not talking religion and I'm not talking about ideology. I'm talking about a very specific kind of a neurological event. The moment when a new identity stops being something you're maintaining and simply becomes who you are. Because here's the thing most people in midlife reinvention don't understand. You can do everything right and not cross that essential set threshold, right? You can change your behavior, your language, your environment, your job, your relationships, and you can still be at that neurological default. You can still be that old version of yourself. And that gap between I've changed and I've converted is exactly where most people get stuck. And they interpret it as failure, as evidence that reinvention is a lie, as proof that you can't actually teach an old dog new tricks. But it's not failure. It's what I call stage 3. And today I'm going to show you what that means and why you're there and how to cross over. So let me give you a quick tour of what's happening in your brain during reinvention. And I promise I'm going to make this the opposite of that neurological or neuroscience lectures that I have a tendency to veer into. You have a system in your brain we're going to call the default mode network, okay? Default mode, because everyone knows what that means. Let's call it the DMN for short. And it's active when you're not focused on any specific task. So when you're daydreaming, reflecting, when you're thinking about yourself or other people, or you're basically doing anything that isn't a direct problem to solve. So that DMN is your self-story network. It's a system that generates and maintains your ongoing story, your autobiographical narrative, so to speak, right? Your sense of who you are across time. And it's your understanding of yourself in social context. So it's your prediction of how you'll behave in any given situation. So let's call it your identity engine, right? And it's deeply, deeply conservative. That DMN, it builds its model from all the accumulated data it has on how you've behaved. Years of it, decades of it. By the time you're in your 40s and 50s, got a lot of data. So every time you reacted or to a certain way in a certain situation, it logged it, right? Every pattern, every behavior, every repeated emotional response, every consistent choice you made, that DMN, it cataloged it and it built what we call like a prediction model. It knew what you were going to do because it had so much data. That model is so efficient that it runs before you consciously even decide anything. You might walk into a room full of people who knew you 10 years ago, and before you have a single thought, your nervous system has already activated that version of you that those people knew. And this isn't weakness. This is your brain being brilliant at efficiency, right? The problem is that efficiency, it works against you in reinvention because you've been consciously building a new identity, making different choices, making different things, saying different things, inhabiting different spaces. That TMN is still running prediction models based on all that old data, that old you. It's like trying to watch a new TV show on the app, right? That keeps buffering because it's using up all its processing power, trying to reload everything that you watched in Netflix in the past. So that old data is heavy, and the new data, right? It won't be there until it reaches a critical mass, until there's enough repeated evidence of the new identity so that the old one stays where it is. If you haven't done that, then the old model stays dominant. This is why you revert, right? Not because you haven't changed, but because your brain's prediction model hasn't updated it yet. And the update's coming, right? The conversion is coming. But first, you have to understand the 4 stages so you can figure out where you are and you don't give up, right? So I have spent years watching people go through reinvention, my own and thousands of others who have gone through it with us. And what I've observed aligns remarkably well with the identity research, right? That conversion doesn't happen in a single leap. It actually happens in 4 stages. And nobody really talks about this, right? Nobody maps it out. So people experience each stage and without really understanding which stage they're in. And they interpret that the hard stages, right, as evidence that they failed rather than evidence that they're progressing. So we're going to walk through it a bit so you really understand where you are and you know that don't quit, not yet, right? So stage 1, the early stage of reinvention, you're really trying on a new identity. You decided something, a new career, a new version of how you show up, a new story you want to live by. You start testing it out. And stage 1 has so much energy. It has momentum. There's a high that comes with doing something new, saying something different, having a fresh answer to what do you do? But in stage 1, you are absolutely aware that you are only performing. And you can hear yourself doing it, right? There's a part of you narrating the whole thing. Look at me, I'm trying something new. And there's still a voice inside you that says, I think you are, right? And if anyone from your old life challenges that new identity, even gently, you start to wobble because stage 1 really feels like a costume. It's a good costume, but it's still a costume. So it's not really you. You're hiding behind stage 1. By stage 2, you're actually committed. So the behaviors are becoming more and more consistent. So you're not just trying this, you're doing it. And people around you are seeing that shift. You've probably burned a few bridges back to that old version, right? Which is a sign that it's becoming real. But stage 2 has very specific texture. Under pressure, you have a tendency of reverting, right, to the old you. Not all the time, but when something stressful happens, right, when you're tired or scared or you walk into a room that triggers the old version, the default mode kicks in and runs that old script. And then you feel like a fraud, right? Like all the work has been undone. So stage 2 is where most people quit because the reverting feels like proof that they haven't changed, which it's not. It's proof that the DMN in your brain hasn't updated. That old script is still in default, but the new one is real. It's just not dominant yet. It's getting there, but it's not dominant yet. Stage 3 is much, much closer to that new identity, right? It's your primary operating mode now because you're living stage 3 most of the time. You don't feel like you're performing anymore. You feel like this is you. But that old default sometimes shows up less often, less intensely, but it still comes. And now, instead of feeling like a fraud, it feels like more of a ghost, right? It's a familiar presence that doesn't really belong there anymore, but it sometimes shows up when things happen, right? So stage 3 requires some real conscious maintenance. You have to actively reinforce that new identity if you're in high stress situations, right? So you have reminders. So you start doing morning rituals, you do a journal, you join a community, you go to a therapist, you listen to a podcast, anything that keeps you threading back to the new story when the old one tries to reassert itself. So stage 3 is where most of you listening to this are right now. And stage 3 is not a problem. Stage 3 is really the final stretch. So you want to keep going. Stage 4 is what I experienced at that event that I told you about. The new identity is the default. You don't maintain it. It just is, right? You don't remind yourself who you are. You know who you are. So you don't have to narrate the new version of yourself. You just have to live it. So the old identity hasn't disappeared. It's still there. It's in your memory. It's in your history, in the way you understand yourself. But it does not arrive uninvited anymore. You have to remember it. You have to go looking for it. And here's what conversion feels like in your body. It's a beautiful word called ease. Not the giddy ease of stage 1 where everything's new and exciting. It's a quiet ease of something that has become natural. You react from your new identity instinctively, right? Without consulting anything. And under pressure, the new script runs, not the old one. And that's when your brain has updated the model. The conversion is complete. Now I know what some of you are thinking. How can I speed this up, Faye? I don't want to be in stage 3 for 2 years. What's the accelerant? I'll get to the accelerants, but first I need to really tell you why you can't shortcut the process, because understanding this will save you an enormous amount of self-criticism, right? The reason conversion takes time is memory reconsolidation, right? Every time you recall a memory, any memory, that memory becomes briefly unstable, right? Because the brain opens it up, it updates it with the new information, and then stores it again. And this is the reconsolidation, right? It's kind of like when you're working on a Word document, right? Every time you open it up, there's all the old stuff and you put the new stuff in and then you consolidate it. So that's the primary mechanism by which old identity stories get rewritten, right? So here's the key. That reconsolidation requires real behavioral evidence. It's not enough to think differently about who you are. The brain updates this self-story when the behavior changes, right? So when you actually do the thing that the new identity does, repeatedly in various contexts, even under stress. So if you are, the easiest example is always if you decided to start running or started to start walking, right? You do it repeatedly, you become that person who does it. However, if you have a stressful situation and you quit, you stop doing it for a couple of days, then that behavior doesn't continue. And then the brain believes that you can't go through with it. So every time you act from your new identity, especially under conditions where the old one would have showed up, you're giving that DMN new data to work with. So every time you stay in that new script, the old one tries to run, it can't, because you're accelerating the update by doing the new stuff, right? So every reversion is not a failure. It's the brain exposing kind of like a gap in the data, right? A situation where you haven't accumulated enough of the new to override the old. So the accelerant isn't about thinking harder about who you are. It's acting the new version in the exact context that currently triggers the old one, right? So that's the work of stage 3, specific targeted behavior, right? And then when you get to the stage 4, that's where everything shifts. So let me give you an example so you can understand this a little better. Basically watched this in boardrooms for 20 years. So I'm going to bring you that executive background because it maps it out perfectly. I spent years working with leaders at Godiva, Unilever, franchise systems, top multinationals across international markets. And I watched a pattern repeat so consistently that eventually it's almost became predictable. Every time someone got a significant promotion, a real step up into a role that was generally bigger than what they'd done before, you could watch them go through those 4 stages. Think about it. You've probably seen these people. Maybe it was you. They went through stage 1. They were performing leadership, right? Very earnestly, very consciously. They had all read the books. They knew what they were supposed to do. But you could feel the effort, right? The performance felt polished. There was, a seat. Stage 2, they were doing the job better. They were doing it well. The habits were in place. But under pressure, under a major crisis or board presentation or confrontation with a direct report, they reverted to their pre-promotion self, right? They became a little more junior, a little more differential, more reactive, and that old script ran when things got hard. And then stage 3, they were good leaders and people trusted them, but they still needed support in the hardest moments, right? They still second-guessed themselves somewhat when the pressure was the highest, and there was still a layer of maintenance required, but they were almost there. And then they got to stage 4, and they stopped monitoring themselves and started just leading. And the identity of being a leader stopped being something that they were performing and became something that they simply were. You could feel it in the room, right? The ease of what they felt like, the groundedness, the absence of self-surveillance. So the ones who got stuck, the ones who stayed in stage 2 indefinitely, I guess, they reverted every time the stakes got high. They were almost always the ones who treated stage 2 reverting as evidence that they weren't actually very good leaders. So they worked harder at the performance instead of accumulating more data in high stakes times, right? So they're trying to think their way to conversion. You can't think your way there. You convert through behavior in the exact situations that expose the gap. So let me give you the most useful thing I can offer you today, not the theory, the practice. This is what actually accelerates your conversion, because a conversion isn't uniform across all contexts. There are specific situations where your old identity is more likely to run, like in old family dynamics, right? In former colleagues, environments that hold your old story, in high stress moments. So you have to get specific about which contexts activate that old script, right? That's where you start the work. So you have to identify those. And I don't want you to avoid triggering situations. That's not stage 4 behavior. That's stage 4. Stage 4 means going in and staying new. So instead of avoiding the difficult conversation, the old colleague, the triggering environment, go in deliberately, prepared, and notice what happens when you choose the new script in a context that used to run the old one. Because when the old script runs, and it will, once in a while, a few more times before actually the conversion is complete, note it without drama. You can just say to yourself, hey, there's stage 2, and then come back to your new identity. No spiraling, just do a little course correction, right? So here's the neurological reality. Your brain defaults to the highest familiar script when it's under stress. Makes sense, right? And cortisol literally narrows your whole cognitive bandwidth, and it activates those older, more established neural pathways, right? So this is why you revert when you're exhausted or you're scared or you're overwhelmed. You're not weak. You're literally cortisol flooded. So you regulate before you walk into the room, not after you've already reverted, right? Before. So take like 2 minutes of breath work, a moment of intentional grounding. Arrive as the new version, not because you're performing it, because your nervous system has the capacity to run the new script and you know it. That DMN also updates from social reflection, right? So when people around you consistently mirror that new identity back to you and they talk to you only as your new version, you can expect things from you that align with the new story. You interact with people as the new converted you. And your brain gets additional evidence that the new model is real, right? Community is not soft support. It's neurological data collection. I can't tell you enough how important it is to surround yourself with a community that knows this new you, because they will reinforce it all the time. So I want to give you that identity turn before I let you go. The thing this episode is really actually about? Underneath all the stages and all the neuroscience, most people treat reinvention like a renovation project, right? You tear out what's broken and you install something better and then live in that upgraded space. And that metaphor is fine, but it misses what's really critical. A renovation is a thing you do to a house and you get to walk away from that house if you want. You can rent it out, you can leave it. It's external to you. But identity conversion isn't renovation at all. It's kind of like a metamorphosis, right? There's a point where the caterpillar, for example, stops being a caterpillar with aspirations and becomes something that can actually fly. Not because it worked hard at being a butterfly, because the change completed itself at that whole biological level. So you're not maintaining the new you are becoming the new you. And that process has its own timeline. And it's really informed by your inputs, what you do, right? What you choose to do, and accelerated by your intention, right? So ultimately, whatever you want to do at what speed you want to do it will reinforce that acceleration, right? So the more you do as the new you, the faster it comes. The grace I want to offer you today is this. You are not failing. You are in process. And the fact that you're still here, still doing the work, still showing up, still choosing the new script, even when the old one runs, that is the data accumulation. So conversion is happening. You don't have to force it. You have to actually feed it. And your second act, it will not be a project you manage. It will be a life that you inhabited. That's conversion. So, okay, that's this week. If something in this episode hits somewhere specific, if you recognize your stage, if reversion makes sense, if you suddenly know exactly what contexts are still running the old script, I want you to act on it before Friday. Because one intentional entry into that triggering context, just one, notice what happens, okay? And then join us on Sunday. Sunday, we have the Sunday morning ritual. It's a guided breath work, meditation, and journaling, and it integrates everything we've covered today. And it's on YouTube. You can check it out at the links below. And if you want to go deeper, if you want that community I talked about, and you want to really build that acceleration with monthly masterclasses, implementation labs, and even a backstage conversation that goes out to our community with Stacy and I, that we go further and deeper in this, you can join us in the Inner Circle. That is our membership, our community. Our founding rate is still available. It's not going to last long, so go ahead and join if you think this is calling you. We also have something really cool happening, which is the 21-day Defiant Second Act Challenge, and that launches April the 6th. It's free. There's no fluff. 21 days of building the life you've been designing. Okay, so you can register at that link below as well. And that's it. I'll see you next week. You are not late. You are converting. Too late? My ass.
And that's a wrap on this one. If something landed for you today, sit with it. That's your nervous system updating its software. Let it run. And if you want to get deeper, the Long Game is our daily ritual app. 15 minutes a day built around the move, mind, and meaning framework. It's the daily practice behind everything we talk about on this show. And you can find it at tlmalonggame.com. And if you're ready to be in the room, the Inner Circle is where we do the real work. Monthly masterclasses, identity challenges, and a community of people who are done playing small. Join us at toolatemayass.com/inner circle. Until next week, stay rebellious. I'll see you then.